My world is dust now, and all I loved is dead. Oh, let me trust now in what my master said. There is a sweetness in every woe. It must be so. It must be so. My world, the dawn will find me alone in some strange land, but they'll be kindly, they'll give a helping hand. So said my master, and he must know.
Ich will's.
Be so. It must be so.
Welcome to the First Universalist Church of Rochester, where we are called to nurture the Spirit and serve the community. I am Peter House, summer minister of this congregation. My pronouns are he and him. And leading worship with me today are Kitty Forbush, she, her, as our worship associate. I don't know for sure, I've never said your name out loud. Tevold? Chetsvold. Brock, he, him. Lou Ward Baker, he, him for our music. McCormick Chu, he, his, him, providing tech support. And Ezekiel, they, them, and Karen Labraco, she, her, for our online ministry team. If you are here for the first time this morning, we especially welcome you. Thank you for making it to our worship community. We have a visitors forum that can be found in the chat for our folks online and can be accessed by scanning a QR code, which is in your pews or on the back of the order of service. Please fill out the form so that we can offer you a welcome beyond this worship service. Before we take a moment to turn to our neighbor, let us take a moment to turn towards the camera and greet our online worshiping community. Please offer a wave. And if you are online, please pop into the chat and offer a greeting. If you are here at First Universalist now, let us take a moment to turn to our neighbor this morning and offer a greeting.
Are you wanting to announce the hymns, or do you just want me to go in eventually?
I prefer to just... Oh, okay.
You'll announce it, right?
I guess. I like not to announce it, but I will, yeah.
Either way, I just want to know so we're not waiting on each other. Okay.
Just let me get up to the word. And as we wrap up our greetings, let us get ready to sing together number hymn 23, Bring Many Names.
Good morning. I'm Kitty Forbush, your worship associate this morning. Lately, one of my favorite sayings is, stay in the day. The way the days are literally flying by at this stage of my life, I want to be able to treasure my time. I hear people talking about their bucket lists and what they have to do before they die. I've abandoned the idea of a bucket list as I feel like it sets me up for disappointment. Sure, there are things I would like to do, but I've come to the realization that it might not be possible to do all of them. So I'm going to stay in the day. And today it's here at First Universalist with my church family at my spiritual home. Because, home's not really a place. It's wherever you are with the people you choose to love. So come, let us worship together. Will Michael and Kelly Scott come forward to light our chalice? As the Scots light our chalice at First Universalist, and you light a chalice in your own homes, will you join me in saying our chalice words together in unison? May we be a people of welcome, here to grow in heart and mind and spirit, and may we reach out to serve our community. And now will you please rise in body or spirit and join me in our affirmation of faith, followed by our doxology. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humanity and fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the source and meaning of life. Thus do we covenant with each other and with all. This is a long description of the organization for today's offering, but I tried to shorten it, but it was very interesting, so here you go. Today's offering will be collected for RRRS, Rochester Refugee Resettlement Services. RRRS is an organization that welcomes new arrivals to America. They provide a variety of services to help people get acclimated to their new home while retaining their own cultural heritage. They emphasize activities and programs that enhance self-sufficiency while providing safe and affordable housing. CEO Mike Conniff leads a staff of educators, housing specialists, and home support people whose aim is connection and partnering with community organizations to help make the transition smoother for families. Special programs for middle school children during the summer are being expanded due to the enthusiasm of the students and the successful outcomes in their 5-week program. Bishop Kearney High School holds regular yard sales, and this year RRS has sent teams twice to help. RRS also partners with Keeping Our Promise, that assists special immigration visa holders from Afghanistan and Iraq, people who helped America and just want a chance at a stable life here. The organization is always short on housing, so they have been taking in their people wherever they can, helping to grow this community effort at being a welcoming city. Please give what you can to support the work of these compassionate people. You are invited to give online by scanning the QR code in your pews or to drop an offering in the offering basket. For folks online, please click the link in the chat to give to First Universalist Church. Thank you for your generosity.
I invite you now into this reverent time of sharing the joys and sorrows of our gathered community. If you would like to, you can place your hand over your heart to be able to listen from this heart-centered place. As we place stones into a bowl, I will read aloud the joys and sorrows of our gathered community. All online are also invited to share your joys and sorrows in the chat. From Lois Baum, Greg's gold-weight eyelid surgery is Monday, July 24th. Also, some sad news. Greg's brother Kurt died last Tuesday at age 76. So please hold Greg in your heart. From Tom Williams, remembering my friend Larry Watkins of Bayard, Iowa, who passed away this week. We served together in Vietnam. From Bill Elwell, remembering when smoke gets in your eyes was a love story. From Stephen, a joy, we just returned from a lovely trip down to St. Augustine with Alice and her kids. A sorrow, our very old Layla passed away last night. And we drop one final stone into the bowl to represent all the many joys and sorrows left unspoken in the silent sanctuaries of our hearts. May all be held in the heart of love. I invite you now to join with me in a spirit of prayer and meditation. When stuck in traffic, waiting in line, or any time there's nothing to do other than be present, find a comfortable situation and position in which you can breathe freely. What if this were your last breath? Just for this moment, just right now. Believe that this is all you have. No time to worry about the future or the past. Just enough time to know that you are breathing. Draw it in. Savor the sensation of your lungs filling. Savor your heart beating. Savor the sensation of your chest relaxing as you exhale. Inhalation, exhalation. One more time. Inhalation, exhalation. Here, now, you. Whenever I come to the service during the year, I am struck by and impressed at what a beautiful job Lane Mayreed does with the singing bowl, and I can't even begin to do it justice. I used to think that there was something wrong with me. I'd go on a trip with a group of people and everyone else would know exactly where we were going before we went. They'd know each city that we were visiting. They'd know the points of interest that we were going to see in each place. They'd know the itinerary of the whole entire trip. And they would have things planned that they wanted to do and see. The first time I experienced this was when I was in the Hendricks Chapel Choir at Syracuse University as an undergraduate. Each year after the spring semester ended, we would go on a big 2-week tour, and we went to some nice places. Sometimes the destination was even Europe. We had a very wealthy but anonymous benefactor who lived in Cazenovia who heavily subsidized these tours, making the cost for each student quite reasonable. My first year that I was in the choir, we toured the Gulf Coast, from Houston, Texas to Cape Coral, Florida. And up until this trip, I had never been on an airplane, and the farthest from home I had ever traveled was Washington, D.C. I was excited to go, but only in a vague, this should be an adventure kind of way. I didn't look at a map of our route ahead of time. I didn't research the attractions of each city that we would visit, nor did I read up on the history of the region, as several of my friends actually did. And I didn't prepare a list of things that I wanted to do, or a bunch of things that I wanted to see while we were there, like it seemed nearly everyone else had. My preparations consisted of reading the list of recommended items that I should pack, following the list, getting some traveler's checks. Remember traveler's checks? Giving my mother and my housemates the date of my return, and that was about it. I also didn't bring a camera. More on that later. The morning we were to leave, I showed up at the chapel at the appointed time with my suitcase. I boarded a chartered bus to the airport, and I surrendered my being to the experience. I recall that I didn't even know that we had to fly to Newark before boarding another plane to Houston until we were on the first People Express flight. Anyone remember them? And the flight attendant welcomed us to our flight to Newark. I was, as my grandmother was always fond of saying, along for the ride. I had no agenda, I had no concerns, and I had no expectations. I was just following the group. I had made several good friends in the choir who clearly had traveled like this before, so they knew what they were doing. I liked and trusted our music director, and I had packed enough socks and underwear for 12 days. What more was there to think about? The trip was absolutely wonderful. I had never been on an airplane before, and I had never been out of the Northeast. I experienced Texas, which is truly a different world. I went soft shell crabbing in the Gulf of Mexico with lanterns after dark, and I experienced true Southern hospitality in every single church that we sang in. New Orleans was also quite an experience. And for me, it was only that, an experience. I had never really heard anything about New Orleans before. I didn't really know anything about its history or really even anything about its culture. And unlike so many of my friends, I, again, had not done any research ahead of time. So I had never heard of the French Quarter or Bourbon Street. We had a free night to explore the French Quarter. And for a 21-year-old who still considered Syracuse the big city, it was really quite amazing. Because I knew absolutely nothing about where I was or what was there. I simply followed my friends along the entire evening. Paul wanted to see Jackson Square. Patty wanted to go to Preservation Hall. And Paul and Greg had prepared a list of hot spots that we just had to hit on Bourbon Street. It was all fine with me. I had no agenda, no list, and no expectations. In fact, even after they explained to me where we were going and what we were going to do, I didn't really retain the information. I could not have told you one site from another, even after I had been there. I was simply in the moment, enjoying the things I was seeing, enjoying the feeling of being somewhere new and unfamiliar, and most of all, I was enjoying the company of my friends. Paul and Greg had both brought tour books with them, and they read it aloud multiple times as we were passing things, telling us what we were seeing and then telling me where we were going next. Their planning and their books were valuable because, unlike me, they knew where they were, how to get where we were going, and most importantly, by the way, how to get back to our hotel. I did appreciate this at one point on Bourbon Street when I got sidetracked by an older, heavily made-up woman who approached me, put her arms around my neck, and offered me a good time in return for certain considerations. My friends didn't notice that this was happening, and they didn't see that I had been detained, so they kept walking, and I almost lost sight of them before I could finally extricate myself from this rather uncomfortable encounter. Now, if you think about it, I would have been in a real pickle if I had lost them because I had no idea where I was, and I had not even bothered to learn the name of our hotel, which, by the way, an interesting and a good travel tip I will give you. If nothing else, when you go exploring, you should have the name of your hotel written down with you. But overall, it was a magical evening. The jazz music, the chaos, the architecture, the colorful people, the unfamiliar foods. And I believe that it was all the more enjoyable precisely because I had no plans, no to-do list to check off, and absolutely no expectations. I was just experiencing what I was experiencing. A few stops later, we were somewhere in the panhandle of Florida. I'm not sure I ever got the name of the town. We sang at some church somewhere nearby the night before, and we were supposed to spend the night there and then head to Cape Coral, Florida, the next morning. But when we boarded the bus, still in our wet bathing suits and sandy feet, our director informed us that the distance to our next stop had somehow been miscalculated. And so we were going to have to forego spending the night and instead drive through the night in order to be on time for our next concert. Well, so we were college kids. So we took this more in stride than a middle-aged group would have. But there were still some groans and complaints about how awful it was going to be. But again, I was in that surrendered mindset that I've already explained to you and described. So to me, it kind of sounded like it would be fun. I remember that Frank had a AAA map of Florida with him, and he had taped it up on the back of the seat in front of him. Being a bit of a math geek, Frank had calculated how long the trip should take, and even made predictions about where we would reach certain points, what time we would reach certain points on the map in our destination. We should be in Tallahassee by 11 o'clock, was his first announcement shortly after our trip was underway. I noted that, but forgot it. And I was comfortably dozing in my seat when Frank erupted. "It's 11:15 and we just passed Defuniak Springs." That name always stuck with me. That means we're almost 2 hours behind. It's going to be almost 1 a.m. before we hit Tallahassee. And so it went the entire night. Every half hour or so as we would pass an exit, Frank would lament our tardiness and recalculate his estimate of our arrival time. Finally, at 4 a.m., when he announced that we had just passed the exit for Tampa, an hour and a half behind schedule, my friend Andrea finally shouted, "Okay, Frank, enough. Knock it off." Now, I admit that I found his preoccupation with our progress amusing. What difference did it make what time we got there? We were already spending the night on an over-air-conditioned bus in our wet bathing suits. There were wet beach towels hanging from the overhead rack, and there was sand all over the floor. But it was also kind of fun and kind of cozy. There were 30 or so of us, mostly friends, all together, safe and cozy in this little place, a little bit uncomfortable, but having an adventure together. Well, I later found out that part of Frank's frustration was that the itinerary called for us to have a brunch prior to our singing the morning service, and he was worried that we wouldn't be there in time. But just like the rest of the trip, I was just riding the bus, enjoying being with my friends, exhilarated by unfamiliar surroundings, and finding the whole situation kind of fun. If we didn't get there in time for brunch, we'd eat afterwards. As the sun rose, we were driving across one of those long, long bridges that they have in Florida. It was some bridge over some water, is all I could say, but it was a beautiful view. I know that Frank could have probably told me exactly where we were if I had asked, but I was just enjoying being there wherever I was, seeing this beautiful sunrise over the water. Incidentally, by the way, we were late for the brunch. We were too late to have it. We barely had time to change into our choir robes. Nobody had time to shower or fix themselves up. We sang in the church service, played our handbells, sat through the entire church service, and then they did give us some brunch afterwards. I didn't think about it again, because no sooner had we eaten than we were back on the sandy bus and off to our next destination. Some other church, somewhere else, somewhere in Florida. I didn't need to know the details until we arrived. And so the trip went. On the way home, our flight to somewhere was changed to somewhere else at some different time. By the time we got to wherever that was, we had missed our connecting flight to Syracuse, but we all made it home, albeit a few hours behind schedule, and I had had one of the best times of my entire life. Still to date, I would say that. So a few weeks later, my friends Kathy and Greg, a young couple who had just gotten married and they had been on the trip with us, invited me over to see the pictures that they had just developed. Remember when you used to have to take your pictures and have them developed? So Greg was one of those fastidious people who supervised you while you looked at his pictures, warning you not to touch the print itself and making sure that you kept the pictures in strict order. Yes, he did have them numbered. And as I took my tour through the literally hundreds of pictures arranged in strict chronological order and all labeled on the back with things like First Methodist Church, Gulfport, Mississippi, May 16th, 1984, I was struck by this feeling and this sense that my friends had somehow gotten more out of the trip than I had. To be honest, when I looked at the pictures, I recognized the churches, and I recognized the other locations that I was seeing, but I could not have distinguished between the church in Baton Rouge or the church in Mobile to save my life unless I looked at what was written on the back, although Greg was discouraging me from flipping them over to read the back, because this increased the chances that I would smudge them or get them out of order. So I kept asking questions. I mean, honestly, part of it to be polite. You know, you're looking at people's pictures and you want to act like you're more interested than you really are. So I was asking a lot of questions like, which church is this? Where was this taken? And finally, Greg said to me, Peter, were you even on this trip? Well, I most definitely had been, and I most definitely did remember. I remembered it all. The feeling of spending the night in a wet bathing suit on an over-air-conditioned bus, walking in bare feet through the sand that covered the bus floor, watching the gorgeous sunrise from the bus window over some body of water. I remembered how warm the Gulf water was when we walked through it with our lanterns hunting for the crabs, and how Rob and Paul and I had spent one entire evening on a dock watching the moon rise over the Gulf as we had those kind of conversations that college kids have about the nature of life and what our futures might hold. As the breeze blew and the waves gently lapped at the supports of the dock, I remembered my first taste ever of key lime pie. In fact, I'd never heard of key lime pie till I got there. I remembered the fun that I had sitting on the bus with Lisa Reep, making up silly puns, and the fun that I had had with the colorful, idiosyncratic older woman who had put us up somewhere in Texas. What I did not remember, because I had never bothered to learn it in the first place, was the exact location these things happened, the dates that they had taken place, or in which order which thing had happened. And I hadn't brought a camera with me, as most of the others had, or kept any sort of a journal, as a few of my friends actually did, nor did I even bring home any souvenirs other than a couple of seashells. So now that it was all over, all I had were the impressions that stayed with me, and the information that my friends provided with me about where and when and what order things had taken place. And over the years, occasionally I almost did when I prepared this sermon, sent Greg a message like, where did this happen? And then I thought, no, I don't need to know that. So this night when we're having coffee and looking at the pictures, I tried to explain to Greg that the trip had more than lived up to any expectations that I may have had, and that I had many fond memories of where we had been and what we had done. But he was very critical of my approach to travel. You would have gotten so much more out of this trip if you had bothered to do a little research and planning ahead of time, he said, and if you had brought a camera with you. I mean, look at what's happening now. You're relying on my pictures and my memory to remind you of a trip that you took. And, he went on, we actually asked you several times during the trip what you wanted to do, and you never came up with one thing the entire time. You just followed the crowd for 13 days. I mean, there must have been something you wanted to do in all that time. Or probably there would have been if you had done some planning and research ahead of time. I mean, you paid as much money as the rest of us. You deserved the right. You deserved the right to choose some of the things that we did. And in that moment, that evening, at that kitchen table, was when I began to believe that something must be wrong with me. Greg was right. Why didn't I plan more? Why hadn't I done some research ahead of time? What was I thinking not bringing a camera with me? Why hadn't I bothered to set any expectations of the trip? Oh yes, I finally realized, I finally got it. Yes, how much richer my trip would have been if I had made detailed plans. Yes, I realized I definitely would have enjoyed that sunrise a lot more if I had known exactly where I was and what body of water the sun was rising over. And suddenly, at that kitchen table that evening, my experience of my trip completely changed. Instead of having this contented feeling of having had an enjoyable experience, I now felt a deep sense of regret. Why I had missed my entire trip. I hadn't gotten nearly as much out of it as I could have, as I should have, as I deserved to have. Nowhere near as much as I deserved. It had been a real sacrifice, after all, coming up with the $1,100 that the trip had cost me out of pocket. Why hadn't I gotten my money's worth like everyone else? So I vowed then and there that next year would be different, that I would research the places we were going, and I would choose a few things that I wanted to do and see. And as it so happened, next year I ended up on the planning committee for a tour which took us through Ontario and Quebec and Maine. I helped plan the route. I booked some of the churches. I was part of arranging the housing list. So on this trip, I will say that I always knew where we were going next, and usually the name of the churches we were singing in. But I have to confess, I was no better than I had been the year before about choosing sites I wanted to see or experiences I wanted to have. Like the year before, I was content to follow my friends, go the places they wanted to go, see the sites they wanted to see, eat in the restaurants they wanted to eat in. But unlike the Gulf Coast the year before, I didn't enjoy the tour anywhere near as much because the entire time there was a nagging voice in my head admonishing me for not doing what Greg had advised me to do. I hadn't set any expectations again, I hadn't identified any sites I wanted to see again, and I hadn't made any demands on the group. I still didn't have a camera either. Unlike the previous year when I had been blissfully surrendered to the experience, I felt restless, dissatisfied, and disappointed on this trip. Not so much in the trip, but in myself. Like the year before, I was still more than happy to simply follow along and go with the flow, but at the same time, there was now a new part of myself that felt like there was something lacking in me for wanting to do that or being happy and satisfied with doing that. I was missing out. I was letting myself down because I didn't have an itinerary and an agenda and a set of expectations and a camera. And I knew that once again I'd return to Syracuse and I would have to rely again on other people's pictures and other people's penchant for detail to tell me exactly what church we had been in on what day and what town it was in. And I would need all of that information from other people if I ever wanted to reconstruct my trip. So you might think that this experience would have finally provided me impetus to buy a camera, do my research, and make detailed plans when I traveled. But I have now, many years later, come to appreciate that that is just not in my nature. What unfortunately is in my nature, however, is to question and doubt and second guess myself and to always feel that other people have deeper, richer, and better quality lives and relationships and experiences than I do. How many of us have had that feeling, especially in this era of social media, when you scroll through people's lives and you're just sure that everyone is living life way better than you are? And so for the next 30 years, I continue to travel with my friends, letting them make the plans, asserting no demands of my own on the agenda, and not bringing a camera. And while I did enjoy these trips, and I have many good memories, every single one of them felt like my second choir tour. A part of me felt like I must be missing out, and there must be something wrong with me, because I wasn't putting sufficient energy into either the planning of what went on ahead of time, painstakingly documenting it while it was happening, nor reliving it in vivid detail once I got home. And this nagging feeling of something being wrong with me didn't just surface when I traveled. It started to accompany me through my day-to-day life as well. It just is not in my particular nature to make a lot of thorough plans or keep detailed records or spend a lot of time reliving my experiences. Instead, unless I am forced to in situations like work or when dealing with my finances, my natural tendency has always been to more or less meander through life, enjoying whatever happens to present itself, enjoying what I am doing right now, and kind of just letting go of it when it's over. And in relationships with family and friends, I have always preferred letting others set the agenda, letting them choose what restaurant we eat in, what time we're going to meet, or what topics we're going to discuss. Albeit, all the while, feeling there must be something lacking in me because I don't plan or demand or preserve. On Fridays at school, I listen to the long list of chores and activities that my coworkers have planned for the weekend, and then on Monday, I always listen to all of the fun they had and all of the work they accomplished. And I feel inadequate and lacking. I feel as if I am missing out on life because I mostly take each day as it comes unless someone else plans something for me to do or go along with. Or, as I mentioned, I look at Facebook and I see all of the wonderful memories they had made while I was just frittering my time away on activities that I couldn't even recall and were certainly not worthy of posting or sharing. I finally got a different perspective, though, kind of saw the other side of the coin when Michael and I visited Japan in 2015. My friend Tomo's family graciously hosted us, and they were lovely and generous and welcoming. And talk about planning. They had planned a packed agenda for us. We were going to see everything that we could possibly jam into 10 days. And they didn't spare any expense to show us a good time. I have never before or since been the recipient of such generosity. But I have to confess, the schedule was too packed, too full of not to be missed sights and experiences. And in order to keep the agenda that they set, we were rushing from the moment we awoke every day till we went to bed to make sure that we fit in every single item on the exhaustive list that they had made for us. The fish markets, the onsens, the temples, the restaurants, the views of Mount Fuji, the ocean. We'd literally spend 10 minutes in some places before we were shepherded back into the car and off to the next location on the list. It was exhausting and often frustrating because so many of these places were places where we might want to spend a little extra time exploring or meandering around, but it was out of the question. We had a list to get through. By the end of that trip, even my go-with-the-flow nature had reached its limits. And despite the fact that I knew that they were simply trying to be generous and show us a good time, I was feeling rushed and stressed out and dismissed. And I snapped in a way that I never do at Tomo, one of my very dearest friends and one of my favorite people in the whole world. I still feel guilty when I think about it, and I've apologized many times. But in reflecting on it later, I began to realize that schedules and expectations and lists are not only not part of my nature, but I'm not sure they are natural at all. I had done everything that I hadn't done on that Gulf Coast trip. I had researched and planned, and by the way, unlike me, my partner Michael always brings a camera with him, and he literally, and I am not exaggerating because I asked him last night to look for the count, he had literally taken over 7,000 pictures. So I could relive every single minute of that trip if I wanted to. And as a matter of fact, when we were traveling and he's taking all these pictures, I often say to him, "You're missing out on everything by taking pictures of it." He still does it. And my host had compiled the most comprehensive and detailed lists for our trip of any list I have ever seen. And I was following it religiously. But I was extremely tense and not really able to enjoy what I was seeing or doing. And I noticed, by the way, that for the most part, for our hosts, it seemed to be purely an exercise in checking items off the list. Seafood market, check. Buddhist temple, check. View of Mount Fuji, check. It felt mostly like an exercise in completing the list. My blow up at Tomo was a wake-up call to me. I was not being true to myself. Because I finally realized that I did have an agenda. And it was not so much that I had an agenda of things I wanted to do, but I did have an agenda. I wanted to meander and dawdle and gaze. I wanted to lose track of time. I wanted to not know exactly where I was or what time it was or where I was going next or what I was going to do next. I wanted to be surprised. I wanted to be sidetracked. I wanted time to engage in silliness. I wanted to lose myself in the experience without worrying if I was seeing everything that I should see, or documenting it well enough, or fretting over what, if any of it, I would remember afterwards and be able to recount later. Think about it. How long would that matter anyway? Isn't it better to have an experience now than a memory later? Perhaps I am being a little narcissistic and self-involved when I say that I believe that the true nature of most, maybe all people, is to be like I tend to be, to just experience and enjoy the moment. But the Western society that we are all immersed in sends us constant messages like the one my friend Greg gave me the night that I looked at the pictures. That we need to maximize and memorialize every possible experience. That we deserve the best. That we aren't getting what we deserve out of life unless we are constantly plotting and planning and scheduling and documenting. That the entire world and all of the experiences it offers are our due and our birthright. Well, this is an extremely consumerist approach to life, and it's a way of being that is killing our souls and destroying the planet. A few years ago, a colleague and I were discussing retirement. "What's your bucket list for retirement?" she asked. And I will confess that my usual feeling was that usual one that I described of feeling inadequate, because of course I didn't then and still don't have a list. As I've said, it's not in my nature to make lists or big plans. So she recited, however, a long list of trips she wanted to take, new skills she intended to acquire, famous artists she hoped to see live in person, and professional sporting events she planned to attend. It was exhausting just listening to the sheer number of items on her list. But I have to wonder, how many of them will she actually get to? Will she have the energy, the opportunity, the money, or most importantly, the sheer time to do these things? We don't like to think about it, but none of us enjoys the guarantee of a certain amount of time. And how important is a bucket list, really? Where do the ideas for these lists even come from? Are they really true longings of the soul, or mere notions that strike our fancies as a result of too much exposure to commercial media? Think about it for a minute. Is riding a zip line over Victoria Falls, or surfing off the Bucket Peninsula in Bali and documenting it on Instagram really integral to anyone's happiness? Our lives are not lists of accomplishments and experiences to be checked off. In fact, the entire notion of a complete life is a complete myth. Our lives aren't stories with cohesive narratives either. They begin and end at arbitrary times and under completely random circumstances. In many ways, even what happens while we are alive is capricious and random and haphazard. No amount of planning or list-making or goal-setting will truly guarantee us smooth and safe passage or fulfillment. Instead, I believe, and I believe it more and more as I age, I believe that true fulfillment comes whenever we are in the present moment, going with the flow, enjoying where we are, enjoying what we're doing, and treasuring who we are with, not knowing for sure what's coming next and unconcerned with how much, if any, of the experience we're going to remember. In the big picture, in the really big picture, we are tiny beings who exist for an infinitely small and finite amount of time. It's all lost in the end anyway, all of these experiences. And after my mother died, she had bins and bins full of pictures of vacations that I didn't even know where they were. I didn't know who the people were in them, and I ended up throwing them away because they had no meaning for me. I will confess, though, I do have a retirement bucket list. It's very short, but I am sure that if I can accomplish it, it's going to bring me a great deal of happiness. I want to become more adept at giving in to my true nature and not worrying about it or feeling inadequate because of it. I want to move through what's left of my life more immersed in the present moment. I want to enjoy where I am and who I'm with, giving no thought to any other reality or any other possibility. I want to free myself of documentation and photos. I hope to happily traipse after my friends wherever they want to go, whenever they want to go, doing whatever they want to do. And maybe, just maybe, if I'm really, really lucky, at least one more time, I will watch the sun rise over some water, someplace where I don't really even know where I am or where I'm going. And I did something I almost have never done before. I chose a hymn that I didn't know out of the hymnal because the words fit the service. So I would like everyone now to join together and sing hymn number 331, Life is the Greatest Gift of All. Please remain standing as we extinguish our chalice flame before you. Let us read together the words printed on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but we keep its light in our hearts with its message of love and justice, taking it outside these walls to the world we live in until we are together again. As we close our service this morning, I invite you to place a hand over your heart. If you are joining us online, I invite you to turn your settings to gallery view and look upon the faces here with you. For those of us in the room, take a moment to look around at those who are here with you this morning. I would also like to invite everyone that's here in person to join us afterwards in the lounge. As we leave this community of the Spirit, may we remember the difficult lesson that each day offers more things than we can do. May we do what needs to be done, postpone what does not, and be at peace with what we can be and do. Therefore, may we learn to separate that which matters most and that which matters least of all. And let the people of the church say together, Amen.
Oh, lovely swan on the pond tonight, your life's such a mystery. What are your passions and your joys? You just go gliding, gliding. You just go Oh, lovely swan on the pond tonight, please speak now of what you love. Why so mute and why so still? You live in silence, silence. You live in silence. We give voice, we sing our thoughts, express the truth of living life, passion, beauty, pain, and love will always sing, sing, we'll always sing. Oh, lovely swan on the pond tonight, your life's such a mystery. What are your passions and your joy? You just go gliding silently. You just go gliding.